My name is Eric Wiebe. I'm a professor emeritus in STEM education in the college education in North Carolina State. I'm also a senior researcher here at the Friday Institute. I've been more interested in fundamental issues around psychological theory and how they can inform why computer-based learning is effective or not effective. This work has taken the form of computer science education, computationally intensive science education, and also game-based learning. Ultimately, what we're interested in here is students learning. So we're going to be interested in cognitive outcomes, but I think we're really more interested, especially in game-based learning environments, of developing practices. So the practice of science, the practice of mathematical thinking, the practice of computational thinking. So then the question is, why game-based learning for developing these practices? And that now moves from the cognitive side to what we really refer to as the affective side. So affect we can think of as emotion, right? In this case, positive affect would be students highly engaged, highly interested, getting in what's often referred to as state of flow, where they are highly concentrated on the task at hand. We see game-based learning as having some real potential to do that. What you want to present with a student is an achievable challenge. So they have, in this case, a challenge to learn something, but in a game-based environment, that learning often is indirect. So they're presented with a challenge, and the hope is that that challenge is going to be relatable. You know, this is classic of what we'll call gamification. Creating challenges, creating levels, creating hopefully a customized environment where every child can find the kinds of challenges in the context they're interested in.